everybody. This is Glenda with AKA GK Fralin of Friendly Community. And our friendly community welcomes you. Today I am reading a short story by Mark Twain called Jim Baker's Blue Jay Yarn. And it starts like this. Animals talk to each other, of course. There can be no question about that. But I suppose there are very few people who can understand them. I never knew but one man who could. I knew he could, however, because he told me so himself. He was a middle-aged, simple-hearted miner who had lived in a lonely corner of California among the woods and mountains. A good many years had studied the ways of his only neighbors, the beasts and the birds, until he believed he could accurately translate any remark which they made. This was Jim Baker. According to Jim Baker, some animals have only a limited education and use only very simple words, and scarcely ever. A comparison or a flowery figure, whereas certain other animals have a large vocabulary, a fine command of language, and a ready and fluent delivery. Consequently, these latter talk a great deal. They like it. They are conscious of their talent, and they enjoy showing off. Baker said that after long and careful observation, he had come to the conclusion that blue jays were the best talkers he had found among the birds and the beasts. Said he, "There's more to a blue jay than any other creature. He has more moods and more different kinds of feelings than other creatures. And mind you, whatever a blue jay feels, he can put into language, and no mere commonplace language either, but rattling, out-and-out book talk, and bristling with metaphor too, just bristling. And as for command of language, why, you never see a blue jay get stuck for a word. No man ever did. They just boil out of him. And another thing I've noticed a good deal, and there's no bird or cow or anything that uses as good grammar as a blue jay. You may say a cat uses good grammar. Well, a cat does. But you let a cat get excited once, you let a cat get to pulling fur with another cat on a shed 23 nights, and you'll hear grammar that will give you the lockjaw. Ignorant people think it's the noise of fighting cats make that is so aggravating. But it ain't so. It's the sickening grammar they use. Now, I've never heard a jay use bad grammar, but very seldom. And when they do, they are as ashamed as a human. They shut right down and leave. You may call a jay a bird. Well, so he is, in a measure, because he's got feathers on him and don't belong to no church, perhaps. But otherwise he is just as much a human as you be, and I'll tell you for why. A jay's gifts and instincts and feelings and interests cover the whole ground. A jay hasn't got any more principle than a congressman. A jay will lie, a jay will steal, a jay will deceive, a jay will betray. And 4 times out of 5, a jay will go back on his most solemnest promise. The sacredness of an obligation is a thing which you can't cram into no blue jay's head. Now, on top of all this, there's another thing. A jay can outswear any gentleman in the mines. You think a cat can swear? Well, a cat can. But you give a blue jay a subject that calls for his reserve powers, and where is your cat? Don't talk to me. I know too much about this thing. And there's yet another thing. The one little particular of scolding. Just good, clean, out and out scolding. A blue jay can lay over anything, human or divine. Yes, sir, a jay is everything that a man is. A jay can cry, a jay can laugh, a jay can feel shame, a jay can reason and plan and discuss. A jay likes gossip and scandal. A jay has got a sense of humor. A jay knows when he is an ass just as well as you do, maybe better. If a jay ain't human, he better take him in his sign, that's all. Now, I'm going to tell you a perfectly true fact about some blue jays. And this is Baker's Blue Jay Yarn. Well, I first begun to understand jay language correctly, there was a little incident happened here 7 years ago. The last man in the region but me moved away. There stands his house, been empty ever since. A log house with a plank 24, a tramp abroad. Roof, just one big room and no more. No ceiling, nothing between the rafters and the floor. Well, one Sunday morning I was sitting out here in front of my cabin with my cat, taking the sun and looking at the blue hills and listening to the leaves rustling so lonely in the trees, thinking of the home away yonder in the States, and I hadn't heard from in 13 years. When a blue jay lit on that house with an acorn in his mouth and says, "Hello, I reckon I vest truck something." When he spoke, the acorn dropped out of his mouth and rolled down the roof, of course, but he didn't care. His mind was all on the thing he had struck. It was a knot hole in the roof. He cocked his head to one side, shut one eye, and put the other one to the hole, like a possum looking down a jug. Then he glanced up with his bright eyes, gave a wink or two with his wings, which signifies gratification, you understand, and says, "It looks like a hole. It's located like a hole. Blame it, I don't believe it is a hole." Then he cocked his head down and took another look, and he glances up perfectly joyful. This time, wink his wings and his tail both, and says, "Oh no, this ain't no fat thing. I reckon if I ain't in luck, why, it's a perfectly elegant hole." So he flew down and got the acorn and fetched it up and dropped it in. and was just tilting his head back with the heavenliest smile on his face when all of a sudden he was paralyzed into listening attitude, and that smile faded gradually. Out of his countenance, like breath, often a razor, as the queerest look of surprise took its place. Then he says, "Why, I don't hear it fall." He cocked his eye at the hole again and took a long look. Raising up and shook his head, stepped around to the other side of the hole and took another look from that side. Shook his head again. He studied a while, then he went into the details, walked around and round the hole, and spied into it from every point of the compass. No use. Now he took a thinking attitude on the comb of the roof and scratched the back of his head with his right foot a minute, and finally says, "Well, it's too many for me, that's certain. Must be a mighty long hole. However, I ain't got time to fool around here. I got to tend to business. I reckon it's all right. Chance it anyway." So he flew off and fetched another acorn and dropped it in. I'm going to have to stop there, and this will be part 1. I'm going to go ahead and post part 2 today because it's kind of an odd place to stop without finishing the story. So we'll see what the bird does. And see if I can continue talking like Jim Baker. Hope you're enjoying it, and I will finish it up. I'll see you in a minute.